It is my honor and joy to share the sermon this morning with Joe Rubio, the lead organizer for the Valley Interfaith Project. I've gotten to know Joe over the past few years, and I've come to deeply appreciate the work that he and Valley Interfaith Project, VIP, are doing around issues like funding of education, immigration, access to health care, and others. I've gained a great deal from clergy meetings that are led by VIP, which gather together clergy of various traditions to work on social justice. Some of our members in our congregation have been involved with Valley Interfaith Project on various issues, including recently increasing funding for schools via overrides, budget overrides. And I hope as a congregation we'll become increasingly involved with VIP, giving us the opportunity to amplify our voice on social justice as we sit at the table with other faith organizations to do the good work of building the world we hope for. But that's not why we've asked you here. I'm working on being funny. Thank you. This morning, Joe and I want to reflect on reason and social justice. Our theme for this month is reason. And Joe and I are going to reflect, maybe loosely, on reason and social justice. Joe, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for being here. Welcome.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here with you in worship, and can I just say, your music is wonderful. If I had planned this right, I would have had them accompany me. Okay. And thank you, Pastor, for those kind words. So we're going to look at the theme of reason, but I'd like to propose to you that we're really looking at 3 R words: reason and relationship and rationalizing. Reason, relationship, and rationalizing. And I look at these themes a little differently now than I did when I studied philosophy, and studied a lot of reason at the University of Texas as an undergraduate a while back. But now that I'm a husband, a father of 4 school-age children, a community organizer, a resident of Arizona for 11 years, and a children's soccer coach, coincidentally of 4th and 5th graders. I got a big brood this year. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So in the midst of these webs of relationships, encumbrances, responsibilities, joys and hopes and aspirations, I think we need to put reason in a context, say that it's important, but it may not be sufficient for us to always navigate life. And there's a complexity to us that it does not always bring to life. Now, I certainly prize intelligence, and I enjoy good thinking and good conversations and learning that exhibits the capacity of reason, but we can't underestimate the capacity of people to rationalize things and to use reason in ways that are detrimental. To bend, to twist, and contort thinking because there are other things that have a greater claim on us than, I would say, reason and our rational capacity. And there are some very smart people who have led us down some very dangerous roads in this country and in our community, the worst of which exhibits the justification of violence in many forms. So there are a great many thinkers who have helped us to understand that we're much more than rational beings. And as we come to our beliefs and capacity to reason as such, I would like to suggest to you that who we are as people and how we interact with one another comes because we emerge from a web of complex relationships. Our family, community, congregation, the institutions that we belong to, and all of that plays a part in who we are. And these are full of ambiguity and promise. And for better or worse, they form us, And again, reason helps us to make distinctions to gain clarity, but I'm not sure it's enough. Now, in my profession as a community organizer, I inhabit a political space, more or less. And the thinker who helps me best think about why people do things the way they do and what good judgments are and actions are is Aristotle. Because Aristotle held up that the master virtue was something he called political wisdom or phronesis. Have you ever heard of that? Ann has. Okay. Well, you taught this. Okay. All right. And for Aristotle, phronesis was the ability to size up a situation and to determine what's the best action in this particular case. We may not have ever been in a situation like this, but given our experience, our learnings, you know, what we know about the people that are in the situation, the events, what's the best thing to do? And he says, it is the wise person, it is the prudent person who knows how to do it. And you cannot separate action from that. It requires that we are doing something. It's not enough just to know the right thing. It's not enough just to be able to judge it. It is how you embody it and how you make those judgments. And quite frankly, he says, young people are not that good at it. Okay? This requires experience. It requires learning, teaching, making mistakes, having mentors, people who know this. You know, and those who have reflected upon this notion of political wisdom, people like Isaiah Berlin and others have said there are master statespersons who do this very well. And he lifts up FDR and Lincoln and others who do that. He said at best what they did is they embodied a set of virtues. And it was more than just how they thought, but they understood others. Now, I'm attracted to this notion because it means if you're going to be effective, then you have to know how to act and respond and initiate in certain situations, how you see situations as complex as they can be, and understand what people's motivations are. Because quite frankly, when you're working in the field of social justice, you know, not everyone that you work with is going to be necessarily doing things for the same reasons. In fact, Saul Alinsky says people often do the right things for the wrong reasons, and we're going to let them do it. Okay? If you want to understand, you know, why the business community in this state finally decided to oppose, you know, a lot of the anti-immigrant laws that were coming up, you know, it wasn't because they necessarily thought of, you know, the dignity of each person involved. Okay? But we'll take it. All right? If you want to understand why Medicaid got expanded, you know, the motivation wasn't necessarily that everyone needed to have health care and be taken care of. That's okay. You know, there are complexities and ambiguities that we need to negotiate. And realizing that not everyone is going to share our motivation. But that's why we need, I think, also to understand a notion of what we call interest. Interest. And we got that initially from Adam Smith, who thought that if we understood the interests of the baker, you know, and the merchant, and, you know, the homemaker and others, that they would begin to coincide because of how they began to deal with each other in concrete situations, and out of that would form society. And because we would understand one another's interests, it would lead to a civilizing, because people who were different from one another would deal with each other in order to help each other achieve their interests. And economists have taken that term on and they've moved forward. But it is very useful in thinking about people so that we do not stereotype one another. Let me give you an example. I've organized for, let's say, 25 years now in Texas and Arizona. And one of my experiences about 15 years ago was working along the border in El Paso to get water and sewer projects to 70,000 people who did not have it. They basically were living on undeveloped land with the promise that we were going to bring those services later. And, you know, we did it. It took close to $500 million of investment and organizing, but we did it. Now, part of keeping our organization funded is we would go to businesses and talk to them about our work and, ask them to write a check, say, this is good for our community. Well, there was this one fellow, a business magnate in town, his name was Stanley Job. And his work was making concrete and selling concrete, and he did very well at it. And we went in to visit Mr. Job, and we were talking to him about our work to help organize parents and teachers to be involved in schools, about how we were working to help create, health clinics. We were doing things to get better jobs, and he disagreed with us about everything that we raised. Why? Because he believed in the private sector and the market taking care of things and not the public sector. And we were very much thinking, well, we've got to figure out what works best in our community and support public things. And at the end of the meeting, he pulled out a checkbook and he wrote us a $5,000 check. And I'm telling you, it had been a tense conversation. I said, Mr. Job, we didn't think this conversation was going so well. Why are you investing in us? He says, you know what? I poured a lot of concrete for those water and sewer projects. You guys are good for business. Okay. Well, we have got to figure out in a complex and pluralistic society and community how we understand one another in a way that we do not demonize, that we do not stereotype, and we figure out workable solutions. Reason helps us with that, but it's only a part of it. And it's those interests to understand, what are those stories, those experiences, the people who helped to form you. And if we understand that about one another, we can begin to work with one another. A good friend and mentor of mine, some of you may know him or have read of him, Reverend Tech Sample, who had lived in the Phoenix community for about 12 years, says, you cannot understand interest until you know someone's story. What made them who they are and what they're about. I have seen this multiple times with officials we've worked with in my family. We see it playing out in public life all the time, and we may not come to perfect solutions, but we come to something that we can work with, and we figure out how to break through those situations that ordinarily with people we would not deal with. I mentioned earlier that I'm a soccer coach. My team started its season yesterday. Last year I had 16, I've been coaching 5 years. I had 16 players on the team last year, 35 signed up this year. I had to divide up the team into 2 teams, and we're trying to do it. And my son, who's one of the players, is looking over my shoulder trying to help. That's kind of the coach's kid's prerogative, right? And there's this one child we were trying to, definitely trying to figure out what to do, Billy. Really troubled kid. And he'd been on the team last year, and we weren't sure kind of what, should we keep him with, the stronger players or not. And Luke said, my son Luke says, Daddy, I'm tired of Billy at school too, and he gets on my nerves, but he is a good athlete. Let's put him on our team. Well, okay. Well, we had our first game yesterday. And I'll tell you, we won. It was a close game. Billy played very well. He almost scored the ball. He missed by that much. Every kid on that team came and gave him a high five in a way that he had never received that type of affirmation. Children understand interest too. Not always sure how to deal with it. But it's out of acting together and seeing that we need one another that we develop the relationships. And we begin to understand each other in a different way. Scripture actually provides a very clear narrative on how to do that. There's a very fine scripture scholar named Walter Brueggemann who does a lot of work with the Hebrew Bible. And he writes about the Torah, particularly Exodus, and how Moses helped to form a new people. And he says that there were 3 stages to that. One was reason. There was a critique of what's wrong. He says there's a critique of the dominant ideology. We're in Egypt, and hey, the slavery is not such a good thing. It degrades our spirit. Okay, we are less than human. Okay, they had that critique. But Brueggemann says this: insight never liberated anyone. Can you say that with me? Insight never liberated anyone. Okay, it's not enough to know it here. You got to do something with it. Okay, and what Brueggemann says that the Exodus story is about is the second stage, which is the public processing of private pain. People coming together out of their isolation, coming and telling their stories, and they begin to understand one another differently. And he says, at this point, God wakes up. See, God's kind of been sleeping. You know, when bad things happen, we wonder where God's at. Well, because he hasn't heard the cry. And when he hears the lament, he enters back into history. And the third stage of that is when God is working with us, it releases a new social imagination, a new vision, a new energy of how to get things done. And have we not seen that in some of the great strides that we've made in this country and in this world? When people come together in a different way, miraculous things happen. In a sense, we become co-creators with God to make something new and fresh and imaginative. That's about bringing together the kingdom. So yes, reason is a part of it, but we've got to act on it. We've got to know how to seize those situations, how to work with others in a different way. And we do it with God. And that's part of forming a people. Okay, so Pastor, I'm not sure where you go with this. It's helpful. Okay, but you are, and I'm going to sit down, so thank you.
Co-creators with God. How do you work with a guy like Joe? I ask myself this all the time. What might co-creators with God mean to Unitarian Universalists? I know that among us are strong theists and among us are strong atheists, but I think maybe, well, many of us, if maybe most of us, find ourselves in the position described by the Unitarian Universalist scholar Jerome Stone. Not as confident as the atheists in their anti-theism, and not able to make the affirmations of most theologians. Can't say there's definitely no God, can't say there is. Can't say for sure what you mean when you say God. So if we're going to go with Joe and Walter Brueggemann and say that we're co-creators with God, we might ask, what God are we talking about? Well, Jerome Stone, the philosophy professor and UU scholar whom I just mentioned, offers an interesting answer to that question in his book, The Minimalist Vision of Transcendence. It did not make the Amazon bestseller list, but it's a good book. To set the stage, Jerome Stone talks about the secularization of America. Now, to be sure, religion still plays a big role in our culture, but overall, its power is decreasing. We are becoming a more secular nation in some ways. He writes, given that the meaning of secularity is the loss of a transcendent source of meaning, secular existence will either find a source of meaning within this life, or it will find life essentially meaningless. In other words, when the traditional personal God is no longer at center stage, secularism tends to take one of two paths. It sometimes declares life meaningless. We're just cosmic accidents, walking, talking bags of hydrogen and carbon and oxygen, whatever. And we may as well go get ours. But there is a middle path, I think, between hardcore, no-meaning secularism and belief in a personal God. Stone wrote, let's get religious for a minute. What if the earth and its creatures were sacred? What is sacred we treat with overriding care. So he says, what if the earth and our sibling creatures were sacred, either inherently sacred, or because they have a derivative sacredness as creatures of God? In the end, it kind of doesn't matter how you get there. He says, I would say that my enlightenment involves finding out that I am of the earth, that I am earthly. The continuing task is to find out what that means and to live by it. In thinking that way, we can identify with our Quaker siblings who remind us that there is a light within each of us waiting to guide us if we give it space and attention. There is a secular, quote unquote, way of thinking which says that nothing is holy, that nothing is worthy of awe and reverence. But I think Unitarian Universalist theology lends itself to the notion that in some way, everything is God, and God is or is in everything. And so for the world to be whole, for God or the good to be active in the world, we need one another. God is most evident, the good is most evident when we're in partnership, working to make the world a more just and holy place. So when we sit down across the table with one another, Catholic and Unitarian Universalist, Jewish and Muslim, humanist and Protestant, we're looking God in the eye. We are then co-creating with God, cooperating with that sense of the holy that is best found in community, but is in each of us. And seen that way, then all our social justice work and our worship and our small group ministry and our children's religious education, it's all the result of the same impulse. The impulse to get in touch with and to co-create with that goodness that transcends mundane secular existence. Even if it's a minimalist transcendence, there is something greater than a mundane, secular, detached existence. It seems there was a debate over something like this in the early Christian church. It didn't take long for the arguing to start, by the way. It was about 40 years after Jesus died, the letter of James was written. The debate essentially is this: does right belief make you a faithful person, or does right action make you a faithful person? Some said it was right belief. If you believe the right things about Jesus, Paul kind of trended this way. Believing the right things about Jesus is what's important. But the author of the letter of James disagreed. He said, what good is it, brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, I'll pray for you. I added that part. And yet you don't supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So the author of James says, faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Some say, show me your faith apart from your works, he concludes, and I, by my works, will show you my faith. I don't think Unitarian Universalists often need James's warning that faith without works is dead. We have declared as an association support for Black Lives Matter, for women's rights, for voting rights, for marriage equality. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at the UU's annual business gathering the year after Selma. One of the most joyous moments of my life so far was standing at our General Assembly in Portland a few months ago with hundreds of our LGBTQ members and friends from all our congregations across the country celebrating together the Supreme Court's decision the day before that same-gender marriages were worthy of legal recognition. Faith without works, we wouldn't even know how to do that. But let us also not be an association of works without faith. Let our good work with many partners be rooted in our belief in the holiness of every being with whom we're co-creating. Let us show our faith by our works. Amen.